11 out of 22. That's how many bottled water brands failed our review. We looked at water sold at Walmart, Costco, Target, Aldi, and 19 more American stores. 11 didn't hold up. Only 8 actually earned a place in your cart. And what turned up isn't marketing spin. It's arsenic, a family of industrial compounds called PFAS that scientists have linked to cancer, and up to 240,000 microscopic plastic particles floating in a single liter. This isn't guesswork. It's built on Consumer Reports testing, published investigations, FDA recall records, and peer-reviewed studies out of Johns Hopkins and Columbia University. We ranked them from lowest concern all the way down to the single worst offender on the shelf. Then we hand you the 8 brands that genuinely deserve your money. But before you reach for your next bottle, ask yourself one honest question. How sure are you that what's inside actually matches the story printed on the label? Welcome to the hidden receipt. Let's begin. At number 11, Arrowhead. You already know Arrowhead. It's that crisp mountain water with the snowy peak stamped right across the front. The brand has been around for more than 100 years, sourced from springs scattered across the American West, and it's one of the cheaper large bottles sitting on the shelf. That heritage image is the entire pitch, pure, natural, pulled straight from an untouched mountain slope. But here's the twist. Arrowhead spent years marketing itself as 100% mountain spring water, and that exact claim dragged the company into a lawsuit back in 2017. The suit argued the wording was deceptive because the water didn't come from a single pristine spring the way the label made you picture it. Then in 2018, a study from Orb Media tested 250 bottles across 11 different brands and found plastic particles in almost every single one. Arrowhead was included. We're talking tiny fibers of polypropylene, the same material used to make bottle caps. So the brand that sold you a mountain was quietly handing you microplastics you never agreed to swallow. Arrowhead promised you a pure mountain spring. What you actually got was a lawsuit over the label and plastic drifting in the water. Number 10, LaCroix. Now I know that's sparkling water, not still, but a huge number of people treat LaCroix as their healthy swap for soda, which is exactly why it belongs on this list. The can is bold and colorful, the bubbles feel a little fancy, and the brand built an almost cult-like following on the promise of innocent water. But in 2020, Consumer Reports tested 47 bottled and sparkling waters and flagged PFAS in several of them. LaCroix landed among the 7 brands that came back positive. PFAS are nicknamed forever chemicals because they simply never break down. Studies have tied them to liver damage, thyroid disease, and certain cancers. Now the readings were low, and LaCroix pushed back hard, insisting their own testing showed undetectable levels. But here's the real problem. There is still no federal limit on PFAS in bottled water. Low and safe are not the same thing when the rulebook doesn't even exist yet. LaCroix promised you innocent water. What you got was a brand caught right in the middle of the forever chemical conversation. Number 9, Deer Park. Another name that sounds like it should arrive with tall trees and fresh country air. And for a long stretch, that image did the heavy lifting. Deer Park has been bottling spring water since 1873, which makes it one of the oldest names in American water. It's a familiar handle in gas stations and grocery coolers all across the eastern half of the country. But Deer Park registered PFAS at 1.2 parts per trillion in that very same Consumer Reports sweep. That sounds microscopic, roughly 1 drop in an Olympic swimming pool. But scientists keep lowering the threshold they consider safe, because these chemicals accumulate inside your body year after year after year, and there's a bigger story hiding behind the pretty label. Deer Park was owned by Nestle for years. Then in 2021, the brand was quietly sold off to a private investment firm called One Rock Capital Partners. This is water that changed hands like a stock, not like a spring. Deer Park promised you a fresh, natural spring. What you got was forever chemicals and a corporate shell game. Number 8. Poland Spring. This is where the countdown starts feeling personal, because Poland Spring is one of the most trusted names in bottled water for millions of Americans. The label shows a green forest, and it practically screams Maine. Pure, untouched, nature in a bottle. Millions of families reached for it for decades, believing that exact story without ever blinking. But in 2017, Poland Spring faced a class action lawsuit that argued the water wasn't legally spring water at all. The claim was that it didn't actually come from the natural spring the marketing described so lovingly. And in 2020, Poland Spring also showed up flagged for PFAS in independent testing. Let that settle for a second. A brand selling you the image of a clean Maine forest was caught arguing in court about whether its water was even from a spring, while simultaneously carrying detectable forever chemicals. Poland Spring promised you a pure Maine spring. What you got was a courtroom fight over the label and chemicals the testing found sitting inside. Now, here's the thing that keeps surfacing, and you should really hear it before we go further. Almost every one of these brands hides behind the exact same move. Their marketing says pure and natural. Independent testing says something completely different. The company's internal lab insists undetectable. An outside lab from Consumer Reports or a university says the chemical is right there, plain as day. That gap between what they measure and what independent scientists measure is the entire story you're watching unfold in front of you. And believe me, it only gets worse from here. Quick pause. If you want to walk out of this knowing exactly which brands actually deserve your money, hit subscribe and turn on notifications right now, because in a few minutes we're naming every single one of them. Now let's keep moving, because the next brand is the one that makes people genuinely angry the moment they learn the truth. Number 7. Aquafina. Picture the classic bottle. Clean blue label, that bright word purified stamped right on the front, stacked in every vending machine, airport and gas station in the country. For years Aquafina was everywhere, and it sold you clean, crisp, reliable. Here's the twist most people still don't know. Aquafina is not spring water. It never was. Aquafina is municipal tap water, the exact same public supply that pours out of your kitchen faucet, run through a filtration process and sealed into a plastic bottle with a premium price tag slapped on. In 2007, after pressure from consumer groups, Pepsi was forced to actually change the label and admit the source. But that wasn't the end of it. In 2024, researchers at Columbia University published a study that found roughly 240,000 microplastic particles in a single liter of bottled water, and Aquafina was one of the brands in that testing. Think about that number. 250,000 tiny plastic fragments per liter, in water that was already just tap water to begin with. You've been paying a premium for someone else's tap water with plastic stirred in and a story printed on the outside. That $2 bottle in the vending machine started as the exact same water running through the pipes beneath the street. Aquafina promised you purification. What you got was tap water and a flood of plastic particles. Number 6. Perrier. Now this one stings, because Perrier carries real prestige. It's French, it's been around since 1863. It's the water you order when you want to feel just a little bit sophisticated. The green bottle, the famous bubbles, the water of fine dining and hotel minibars. That bottle genuinely means heritage, over a century and a half of it. But Perrier has a skeleton in its closet. Back in 1990, Perrier had to recall roughly 160 million bottles after benzene, a known carcinogen, was discovered in the water. 160 million bottles pulled off shelves worldwide, one of the biggest beverage recalls in history. That wasn't a rumor or a whisper. That was a documented global withdrawal over a cancer-causing compound. It was a scandal big enough to dominate headlines around the world for weeks. And decades later, in 2020, Perrier also showed up flagged for PFAS in independent testing. So the brand that sells you French elegance carries a history with a carcinogen and a present-day flag for forever chemicals. The heritage is real, so is the contamination. Perrier promised you refined, impeccable water. What you got was a recall for benzene and a modern flag for PFAS. Number 5. Mountain Valley Spring Water. This is the one that rattles the careful shoppers, because Mountain Valley looks like the purest thing on the entire shelf. It arrives in a heavy glass bottle. It's sourced from Arkansas. It brands itself as premium, old-school American spring water that's been flowing since 1871. This is the water health-conscious people specifically hunt down and happily pay more for, because they believe they're doing it exactly right. But Mountain Valley got hit with a class action lawsuit over allegations involving uranium, arsenic, and bromate in the water. Bromate is a chemical byproduct that can form during disinfection, and it's not something you want lurking behind a label nobody ever shows you. The lawsuit alleged the company knew and didn't properly warn its consumers. Now Mountain Valley has disputed these claims, but that's the entire pattern we keep running into. The trusted premium name, followed immediately by a legal fight over what's actually dissolved inside the water. A glass bottle and a green label can look impossibly pure while carrying a courtroom battle underneath. Mountain Valley promised you the most pristine spring in Arkansas. What a class action lawsuit says you got was uranium, arsenic, and a disinfectant byproduct. Number 4. Dasani. Dasani might be the most misunderstood brand in America, and that misunderstanding is exactly why it sits this high on the list. Coca-Cola built Dasani to feel premium. Clean blue label, the word purified, that familiar red and white backing. But Dasani isn't spring water either, it's filtered tap water, and Coca-Cola actually adds minerals back into it, things like magnesium sulfate and potassium chloride. Magnesium sulfate is better known as Epsom salt, the stuff you soak sore muscles in. Potassium chloride is a fertilizer compound. Now these aren't poisons, and plenty of companies add minerals for taste. But here's the real issue. Almost nobody realizes they're drinking a lab-modified version of tap water with additives, not some exotic natural source. Then in 2004, Dasani was pulled into a bromate recall in the United Kingdom, where the product was yanked after bromate, another potential carcinogen, exceeded legal levels. And in a 2024 microplastics analysis, Dasani reportedly scored among the very highest particle counts on the market. Millions of people buy it assuming it's a natural spring source, and that assumption is precisely what the clean blue label was built to create. Dasani promised you clean, simple water. What you got was reformulated tap water, a recall history, and some of the highest microplastics measured. Here's your midpoint review, because the picture is getting darker with every single name. 2 of the last 4 bottles weren't even spring water. They were filtered tap water wearing a story. One got recalled over a cancer-causing compound. Another is fighting a lawsuit over uranium. Which of these did you honestly think was the clean one? Drop it in the comments because it's probably sitting in your fridge right now. And we haven't even reached the top 3 yet. The worst brands on this list cost the most and claim the most. Number 3 is where the trust genuinely shatters. Number 3, Fiji water. Fiji sells you an entire fantasy inside a square bottle. A tropical island, a pristine artesian aquifer, water filtered for hundreds of years through volcanic rock. It's the luxury water you see celebrities holding on camera, the one with the soft pink flower on the front, the one that costs more than almost anything else in the cooler. For a long time, people happily paid that premium believing they were drinking the cleanest water on Earth. Here's the twist. Fiji has actually been recalled over manganese and bacteria contamination. In 2015, the company was forced to pull product from shelves after consumers reported the water tasted and smelled wrong, with testing pointing to manganese and bacterial contamination. That's a documented recall on the supposed purest water in the world. And it didn't happen with fanfare. The recall happened quietly, the way these things usually do, and most customers never even heard it occurred. Then in 2024, Fiji got hit with a lawsuit over microplastics, part of the same wave of legal actions now crashing into premium water brands. And here's the angle almost nobody talks about. This pristine island water gets shipped roughly 5,500 miles to reach American shelves. That's water sitting in plastic containers exposed to heat, vibration, and time across thousands of miles of transit. Conditions that studies say can accelerate plastic leaching into the water itself. So you're paying luxury prices for water that traveled farther than most people fly on vacation, sealed in plastic, with a recall already on its record. Every one of those miles in that warm, shifting plastic never shows up in the marketing. It only ever shows up inside the bottle. Fiji promised you an untouched tropical paradise. What you got was a recalled bottle that crossed 5,500 miles to reach you. Number 2, Topo Chico. If you've ever ordered a cocktail or tried to quit soda, you've probably met Topo Chico, the Mexican sparkling water in the glass bottle with the legendary bite, the cult favorite with the paper label and fizz so aggressive it almost stings your nose. People swear by this brand with genuine fierce loyalty. But here's what makes Topo Chico so devastating. In that 2020 Consumer Reports study, Topo Chico came back with the highest PFAS reading of every single brand tested, 9.76 parts per trillion. That wasn't merely elevated. That was higher than every other bottled water in the entire study. Nobody else came close. And here's the part that stings even more. Topo Chico is owned by Coca-Cola, the biggest beverage company on the planet, with more money and more testing resources than almost anyone else alive. And it still turned up with the worst number on the board. Coke acquired the brand in 2017, So those same loyal, careful buyers who chose Topo Chico as their healthier alternative were the exact people getting the highest concentration of forever chemicals in the whole investigation. The loyalty was real, the betrayal was chemical. Think about what that means for a brand people reach for every single day as their daily sparkler. The love was earned, and so was the reading. Topo Chico promised you crisp, pure, authentic Mexican sparkling water. What their loyal customers got was the single highest PFAS reading in the entire study. And now number 1, the worst water on this entire list, Starkey Spring Water. If you don't recognize the name, there's a reason, because Starkey is sold almost exclusively at Whole Foods. And that fact is the entire horror of it. Starkey was sold by a brand that markets itself on purity to the single most health-conscious shoppers in the country. The people who read every label, who pay extra to avoid chemicals, who genuinely believe they're doing everything right to protect themselves and their families. And according to a Consumer Reports investigation, Starkey had the highest level of arsenic of any bottled water tested, a reading that came in near or over the federal limit for arsenic. Let me say that clearly. Heavily scrutinized, supposedly pristine premium water, with arsenic levels that flirted with the legal maximum. And this wasn't some one-off discovery. Back in 2016, Starkey was flagged by the FDA itself, and the company was actually notified over its arsenic levels. That's the regulator stepping in and putting it in writing. Now here's the frame that should make your stomach drop. If this exact same water came out of a public tap, it would fail. It would be in violation of federal tap water standards. But because it sat in a glass bottle on a Whole Foods shelf, sold at a premium to people paying extra for their health, it kept getting bought. Whole Foods marketed it, and the company's own leadership even called the water pristine. Imagine reading every label in the store, skipping the cheap stuff, handing over extra money because you care about what goes into your body, and walking out with the one bottle carrying the most arsenic of all. The healthiest shoppers in America were handed the bottle that would have failed a public water test. Starkey promised the most careful shoppers the purest water money could buy. What they got was arsenic at levels that would be illegal coming out of a faucet. That's the climax, and I need you to genuinely sit with what it means. The worst bottle on this whole list wasn't bought by careless people. It was bought by the most careful, most health-obsessed people in the store, and it carried arsenic at a level that would fail any public tap. Trust in a label is not protection. The brand image is the product, and it has almost nothing to do with what's actually in the water. So now the obvious question. If 11 of these 22 brands failed, who actually passed? Which bottles are genuinely worth your money? That's exactly where we're headed next. Here's the good news, and it's real. 8 brands actually held up, and you deserve to know exactly which ones they are and why they're different from everything you just heard. Let's start with Essentia. Essentia built its entire reputation on being the cleanest water you can buy, and it backs that claim with a 3-stage purification process that includes microfiltration, reverse osmosis, and ultraviolet exposure. Each stage strips away a different category of contaminant, which is the whole point. No single filter catches everything. More importantly, Essentia actually publishes its quality reports, meaning you can go read the test results yourself instead of trusting a mountain printed on a label. That transparency is genuine, and it's the single biggest difference between the winners and the losers on this list. Essentia didn't ask you to trust the story, it handed you the data. In a market built on pictures of mountains, a brand that shows you its paperwork stands out for the right reason. Next, Proud Source. Proud Source is a spring water, but what makes it worth knowing is the container. It comes in an aluminum bottle, not plastic. Aluminum is infinitely recyclable and doesn't leach into your water the way plastic does, which means you sidestep the microplastic problem that kept resurfacing again and again through this entire countdown. If the single most consistent contaminant we found was plastic particles, then a brand that removes the plastic from the equation entirely deserves your attention. It's a different answer to the same problem. And after watching 250,000 particles show up in a single liter, that answer starts to sound like plain common sense. Then there's Flow. Flow packages its water in a Tetra Pak carton, not a bottle, another genuinely different approach to packaging. The carton is mostly plant-based, and the brand has leaned hard into sustainability as its core identity. The logic is the same as Proud Source, and it's worth repeating. After watching hundreds of thousands of plastic particles turn up in bottled water, A water that simply doesn't sit in plastic stops being a gimmick and starts being the smarter play. Both Proud Source and Flow solve a problem most brands pretend doesn't even exist, and that alone puts them ahead of half the shelf. Wakaya deserves its own mention for a different reason. It's a Fijian volcanic water with naturally occurring electrolytes and an alkaline pH, which is where the health angle comes in. But the notable part is the company's carbon-neutral certification and its one-for-one giving program, clean water donated for every bottle sold. A charity program doesn't automatically make the water cleaner, and I'm not going to pretend it does, but combined with a source filtered through volcanic rock, away from the industrial runoff that drives PFAS contamination, Wakaya earns its spot. It's a brand that at least claims to think about something beyond the bottle in your hand. San Pellegrino is the surprise on this list because it's another heritage premium name, Italian sparkling water sold in restaurants everywhere. It's the kind of water that carries the same upscale image as Perrier. But here's why it passes while Perrier didn't. In a major 2018 study that examined 259 bottled water brands across the globe, San Pellegrino came back with among the lowest counts of microplastic contamination measured. It comes in a glass bottle, it's drawn from a monitored Italian spring, and this time, independent testing actually backed up the premium image instead of contradicting it. That's the rare case where the story and the science finally line up. Voss is next, and the reasoning is refreshingly straightforward. Voss comes in glass. It's bottled from an artesian source in a region with low industrial contamination, and its entire identity is built around that iconic minimalist glass cylinder. Glass packaging removes the plastic leaching variable the same way Proud Source and Flow do, and the low industrial area is a real factor most people never think about. The fewer factories, the less agricultural runoff, and the less chemical waste upstream, the lower the risk of PFAS and other industrial contaminants finding their way into the spring. Voss isn't cheap, but on the question of what's actually inside the bottle, it holds up. It's the kind of water you'd hand a guest without thinking twice, and the testing agrees with the polish. Aqua Carpatica has a unique differentiator you won't hear from any other brand on this list. It's naturally nitrate-free. Nitrates are a contaminant that routinely shows up in groundwater near agricultural areas, and high levels are a genuine health concern, especially for infants. Aqua Carpatica's Romanian source is essentially free of them without any processing gimmick. It's a property of the aquifer itself. The brand markets itself as the only nitrate-free naturally sparkling water, and that single specific measurable claim about a real contaminant is exactly the kind of thing that actually means something on a label, instead of just a pretty picture. And then we reach the cleanest bottle in this entire investigation. Icelandic Glacial. This is the climax of the winning side. Icelandic Glacial is bottled directly at the source in Iceland, from the Ölfus Spring, one of the most famously pristine aquifers on the planet, fed by snowmelt and rain that filters down through volcanic lava rock. In testing across multiple independent studies, Icelandic Glacial consistently came back with non-detectable results in basically every category. No detectable PFAS, essentially no microplastics, water drawn from a source so clean the country itself uses it for its own supply. It's not cheap and it does ship a long way. But when you line it up against every bottle that failed this list, Icelandic Glacial is the one that showed up clean, category after category. If you're going to pay a premium for water, this is where the science actually justifies the price. When a bottle is this clean across the board, the premium finally stops feeling like a tax. So where does all of this leave you? The person standing in the water aisle, staring at more than 20 brands, trying to make a choice for yourself or your family. Here's the honest answer. Stripped of all the drama, almost every brand on the bad list was exploiting the exact same gap. A regulatory system with no federal limit on PFAS in bottled water, weak and inconsistent oversight on arsenic, and a total absence of rules around microplastics. Different agencies oversee different parts of the system, and the gaps between them are precisely where these bottles slip through. They didn't break a law, because in far too many cases, there simply isn't a law to break. That's the cold truth sitting underneath this entire story. When the rulebook has holes in it, marketing fills those holes, and marketing always lands on the most beautiful misty version of the truth while the contaminants stay quietly out of sight. A mountain on the label costs nothing, and it's worth more than the water it wraps. That is the entire business model, and it has been running for decades. So what should you actually do about it? 3 simple things, and you can start all 3 today on your very next grocery run. First, look for brands that publish third-party test results. Essentia does it. The winning brands on this list, the ones that held up under scrutiny, tend to be the exact ones willing to hand you their own lab reports. That's not a coincidence. If a company refuses to show you what independent testers found in their water, ask yourself why they'd rather you didn't look. Second, choose glass whenever it's available. The single most consistent contaminant in this entire investigation wasn't arsenic, and it wasn't PFAS. It was plastic. Glass bottles remove that entire category of risk in one clean move, and that's a decision you can make with your hand, not your chemistry degree. Third, and this is the one most people resist, remember that premium is a price tag, not a guarantee. The most expensive water on the bad list, Fiji, Topo Chico, Starkey, was also some of the most contaminated. Cost and cleanliness do not move together. In fact, this countdown proved the opposite more than once. The more a bottle sells you a story, the more you should want to see the data behind it. And maybe the most uncomfortable takeaway of all, your tap water in most American cities is regulated more strictly than the bottled water sitting right next to it on the shelf. Public water supplies are legally required to test for arsenic and report the results to the public. Bottled water doesn't face that same transparency in every category, and the oversight is split across different agencies with different rules and different gaps. The same glass bottle of Starkey that would fail a faucet test was perfectly legal to sell as premium spring water. Let that sit with you for a second. We have been paying extra, sometimes $3 or $4 a bottle, for water that faces weaker scrutiny than the tap we were taught to distrust in the first place. Now, to be fair, I'm not saying all tap water is perfect. It isn't, and cities across the country face their own serious, well-documented contamination problems, from lead pipes to industrial runoff. The point here isn't that you should never buy bottled water again, or that every bottle on the shelf is poison. The point is that this decision deserves the same skepticism you already bring to everything else you put in your body. You read a nutrition label. You check the ingredients on your food. You research the products you buy for your kids. But most of us never once questioned the mountain printed on a water bottle. We never asked what was actually inside. We just assumed. An assumption is exactly what these brands were counting on, every single time. That trust was the real product on the shelf, and we bought it without ever cracking open the test results. So here's where we land, and I'll make it as simple as I possibly can. Out of the 11 brands that failed, the pattern was always the same. A beautiful story on the front, and something you never agreed to on the inside. Microplastics, forever chemicals, arsenic, or just filtered tap water wearing a fancy jacket and a higher price. And out of the 8 brands that passed, the pattern was just as clear. Real transparency, packaging that removes plastic, a genuinely clean source, an independent test that backed up the premium instead of contradicting it. Essentia, Proud Source, Flow, Wakaya, San Pellegrino, Voss, Aqua Carpatica, and Icelandic Glacial. Those are the names worth your money, and now you have every one of them in a single place. Write those 8 names down, screenshot this, or just remember the one rule that carries all of them. Here's the line I want you to leave with, because it's the only thing that actually protects you. You now know what you were drinking: filtered tap water, forever chemicals, arsenic, and a countdown of plastic seeping into your body. And you now know what to buy instead. Not because a label whispered that it was pure, but because the testing actually said so. Check the source, not the story. Demand the lab report before you believe the label. Choose glass when you can. And the very next time a bottle tries to sell you a mountain, remember that a mountain is just a picture. What's inside is a decision somebody else made long before you ever unscrewed the cap. And that decision is exactly what we're chasing next, here on The Hidden Receipt. Because if this is what's hiding in plain sight on the water shelf, imagine what else is sitting on the store shelves you walk past every single day, without ever giving it a second thought.